I'm Maureen Bradley, and I am a filmmaker, and I'm also a professor here at the University of Victoria.
My name is Denny Unger. I'm the CEO and creative director at Cloudhead Games.
My name is Vincent McCurley. I'm a creative technologist at the National Film Board of Canada.
My name's Daniel Hogg, and I'm a filmmaker and quasi-academic, helping students learn filmmaking at UVic, amongst other things.
How was that last take?
It's good. I couldn't see any of it like the others. That's the beauty of shooting in 360. You can't see anything you've just shot, unless you have a baby monitor, which I don't.
Alright, Gladson, the camera went just a bit too...
On Not For Sale, I served as the director of photography, such as it were, for this film. The VR film set feels limited, as you'd think, with the camera being pointed at everywhere. So you can't hide lights, you can't hide microphones, you can't hide the crew. You can still control lighting, but it has to look like it's part of the set. So it has to be reliant on practical lights and light sources that have a reason for being there. And the camera, you position it where you think is going to afford the most opportunity for interest for the viewer. And understand that they can look at whatever they want.
So the National Film Board of Canada is a government-funded agency that creates socially relevant stories about Canadians and from Canadian points of view. I made my move into VR with, I guess, about 3 years ago. The NFB identified VR as potentially having a large enough audience for us to kind of target that medium. The digital studio has had a history of exploring new mediums and new technologies as storytelling platforms. It started off just as a side experiment to understand the production workflow of VR. And out of that initial experiment, we kind of iterated this idea, and eventually that project became Cardboard Crash.
What I didn't kind of bank on was how much of a roller coaster ride VR would be, because no one knew where the edges were. The technology was so raw and so new that there was just a lot of R&D work we had to do from the very start to really just figure out things that didn't exist before. How do you move around in VR? How do you not make people not sick? How do you handle using hands and stuff like that?
And, you know, with the equipment that we had available to us, even previewing the scene was pretty limited. Even though we're shooting digitally, we still need to download the footage onto the cameras, stitch it together, and then preview it. And it's just too time-consuming to do on set. How does a VR filmmaker direct the viewer's gaze? The most obvious one, I think, is not with your eyes, but with your ears. In real life, that's one of the things we're conditioned to do. You hear a sound, you pay attention to it, or you comprehend what that sound is and you ignore it. And both of which I think can be used.
A lot of directors have been using traditional kind of theater techniques, and also techniques of magicians has been a popular one. So doing things like movement, motion, so if something's moving here, it's going to draw your attention. Eye lines, so if I want you to look over there, I might look over there, right? Naturally, people look at where gazes are.
You're using all of those tools, great environmental design and storytelling, to kind of lead to a natural point of, aha, this is where I'm supposed to focus. And that comes through with lighting and sound and everything, right? It all has to kind of reach a peak naturally. You kind of have to bring all of your tools to bear and more, because it's very experimental.
And then choosing subjects that inherently have visual interest, I think. You get one chance at the beginning of a film, right, to orient your viewer. You get to choose the first thing they see, and after that, all bets are off.
Each time you make a cut in a film, it's as if you're teleporting the person to a new place. So the first thing they do is start looking around to orient themselves. So it means that if you're cutting quickly, the person is constantly disoriented, and that takes away from them experiencing the story, and they're more focused on, okay, where am I?
cameras are getting a lot closer to replicating the human eye. And the closer the cameras get approximating our eyes, the easier it is to shoot a VR video where everything is going to look like it's a reality. I don't know if the viewer's ready to see reality yet as a movie, but that's kind of what we're approaching.
One of the biggest challenges is that you're literally putting a person in a space that feels real, and because of that, because of what your brain expects when it's in that situation, you have to start thinking in a completely different way in terms of design. So it's more like live theater than it is a video game or a movie or anything like that, and it's more like live theater that's always all around you. And people have this weird expectation about what they can and can't do when they're in a space like that. So it's more about learning what player expectation is or user expectation is, and then trying to build systems that kind of account for that.
Yeah, not for sale. Well, I'm the executive producer and I directed this round version that we did. It was really interesting. Like I even now I feel like the idea with doing this was just to figure out the medium, and you can't figure it out unless you do it. So it's so different. I'm really glad we did it. There were things that I didn't understand until we were there with the camera. There were things I didn't understand until we actually shot and I saw footage. And there were things that I haven't understood until just like yesterday when I was editing.
It started off as a technical experiment, and one of the things we wanted to identify was what made VR different than any other medium that came before it. So there's often a mistake when there's a new medium, you try to transport the old medium into the new medium, and it doesn't quite work. So we really wanted to identify what makes it unique. So it was early days of VR, and I interviewed the few people that I knew who had done VR and asked them what was the most powerful feeling you got. And most people said that apart from it's amazing, it's so cool, they said it kind of made me feel sick. So it's like, okay, if nausea is a powerful element of VR, how can we use that to actually enhance the story that we're trying to tell? So in what story would walking away from it feeling sick actually enhance the story? And so the idea was, okay, what if we're in a collision, a car accident? And so that was the first iteration. And the initial storyline was a PSA on distracted driving. So you'd look down at your phone, and then you'd look up, and then you'd be in a collision. But of course in VR, if you feel like you're in a car, you feel like you want to hold a steering wheel. But at that time, there were no hand controllers within VR. So the story had to adapt and change around that constraint, and so we made a self-driving car. And so throughout the project, we continued to iterate through the story in order to work around the limitations of VR or the resources that we had.
I can see any genre of normal flat 2D filmmaking translate into VR. I honestly can. I think, documentaries, action, adventure, sci-fi, the whole gambit of what you can do in filmmaking will translate to VR. It's just that the approach has to change. And you have to have a spirit of adventure in building anything in VR because so much is unknown. And I think if you try to come in and assume that certain things are going to work because of past experience, they don't. And the only out for you as a filmmaker is to have a highly experimental attitude and be okay with that. Be okay with things failing because they will. But when you find those little successes, it's a huge victory, and it will drive your story forward. But if you don't come into it with that attitude, you probably won't succeed.
Yeah, right now is kind of the golden age of experimentation for VR. It's awesome to be in this field because formats haven't really been established yet, right? With television, eventually the 22-minute format was created, or there's the feature-length film format, and you had to build for that. But right now, it's all kind of up in the air. It's this culture of experimentation, which I think is awesome. It reminds me of the early days of the internet when there were all these kind of hacker creator scenes creating net art, and it was very vibrant. But eventually, kind of people have to make money, and then commercialism gets involved, and then very narrow bands of creativity are actually able to kind of thrive in the long term.
Yeah, I'll keep playing with it. I don't know that I'm up for the feature. I thought a year ago that I wanted to do that, but now that I know more about the medium, that doesn't seem very appealing to me. I don't think that's the way to go with the medium. I think playing with it and trying to have that attitude of openness and play and forget filmmaking, flat filmmaking, try to forget those rules and that language, I think that's the way to go.
I think one thing that virtual reality filmmaking does that traditional two-dimensional filmmaking can't do is immerse you. Immersive environments have always captured our imaginations, even if we haven't thought of them that way. So whether it's being in another place or being transported to another place, we've always loved that idea of escape.
Like, you didn't have to wait for the suspension of disbelief that the narrative brings to you after a few minutes of watching a movie. Like, you're immediately somewhere and you are transported. So that's the appeal of the medium. I think the storytelling has to be a bit slower. We're not going to have the same kind of story beats that we have in a linear story. I wonder if even stories are going to be shorter or will change the notion of story. And I think it's just going to be way more theatrical.
We have to relinquish control as filmmakers. We have to say, all right, we can't tell them where to look anymore, so how do we make our stories that much more compelling?
Film directing is about constraint in a lot of ways. It's about framing a shot. It's about guiding a user to a very specific moment or a very specific scene. And you don't have that in VR. Good VR is about letting go of all of the control that you had and figuring out more subtle tools to kind of trick the user into following your narrative.
Nobody has the rule book. There's no 360 film school. It's all like, how the heck do you get this technology to work and stitch things, and where is the emphasis on the creative? I don't know if I missed the tools of the flat film when we were shooting. I was frustrated more than anything. I was just like, ooh, you know, like someone else is holding the pen and writing, and they're like writing in a different language, and I just want to grab the pen and write what I want to write. Like, that's what it was like. It was so frustrating. It's like, why can't I just do what I want, you know? Because I'm so used to communicating in a completely different way.
The entertainment industry in Southern California is always looking for the next big technical achievement.
And at 6, Marco Robles takes us to a virtual reality convention exclusive to industry insiders that's showing off some of the mind-blowing technology.
So I was just at VR on the Lot in Hollywood at the Paramount Studios, and it was a conference with Hollywood directors and, you know, basically anybody who mattered in Hollywood who cared about VR was there to discuss what the medium means and where it could go. And what was apparent to me was that Hollywood doesn't understand VR, but they're trying to.
Yeah, I was really struck by looking at the scripts that were submitted and how we just don't know how to write for that. Even when we were workshopping it in class, all of us were just so, you know, frontally focused. When we write a film, we see it in our head, and none of us are acquainted with this idea of cueing people into a whole round space. So maybe talking to our theater friends will be helpful.
360 video, and I guess VR in general, is just another medium. So just like we were able to tell stories through word of mouth, through books, through radio, through film, this is another way. And right now we're in the early phases of that, and we're going to figure out what works best in VR, because traditional cinema is still an amazing way to tell a story, and I'd say it's a more curated way. Just being able to use the frame is such a critical tool for the director to be able to focus an audience's attention. Right, with 360 video you don't have that, but 360 video has that element of presence, which is so powerful. And so the projects that will succeed in 360 video and VR are ones that really take advantage of that sense of presence.
And Hollywood has to get its head around the idea that you can build sets, you can costume your actors, you can do all that stuff, but you're going to capture it in a very different way. You're going to do photogrammetry, you're going to capture environments in 3D and bring them into a scene. You're going to catch actors in light field displays or light field capture. But you're going to create a volumetric environment that the user can be in and exist in, because it's going to track the user completely positionally and let them feel like they're really in the world. And it's really the only way to make a person feel like they are there 100%.
I think narrative storytelling in virtual reality is in its infancy. And like any natural cycle, you know, when something's in its infancy, it's not going to be complex. It's going to be, you know, basically holding simple ideas, and it has a lot of room to grow. And the people that are interested in growing narrative storytelling and other forms of filmmaking in virtual reality are going to be the ones that have the opportunity to be on the ground floor when something really big and revolutionary happens.
I think one of the big ways that's going to change us and how we communicate in the next even 5 years is it will enrich socialization in a pretty powerful way, and a number of companies are working to build the metaverse, you know, the Facebook of VR.
I think if you look long term, far enough, it's eventually going to become indistinguishable from reality. That's kind of a big goal. Everyone wants to create the holodeck or the Matrix or Oasis or yeah, there's all these kind of ultimate virtual realities. And on the way, the technology is going to kind of limit us to getting to that point, but we'll kind of slowly chip away at that. So eventually we'll include taste and smell and all these other senses. Eventually all of our senses will be mediated by a computer.
I think the avatar of the VR world is going to come around when there's over 1 billion users. So it's like the technological tipping point. When you have that many users, then you can put huge amounts of money into the R&D. So I think that tipping point's going to come like with Facebook. When there were 1 billion Facebook viewers, then boom, Facebook took over the world. So if and when there's a 1 billion dedicated, enthusiastic, excited VR viewers, then I think things are going to tip and it's going to be more ubiquitous, and I'll press my phone and I'll have some kind of 360 hologram pop up, and it'll be really satisfying.
The people that really believe in it are going to be the ones, the early adopters, are going to be the ones that can drive forward the imperative for technological change and advancement. So when can we turn the realization of headset-free VR into the holodeck of Star Trek: The Next Generation, right? And that's without the interactivity. If we can get that far, if I can go into a hard-boiled pulp noir novel like Picard does, then that person will be rich. Whoever makes that will be super rich.
In terms of storytelling and narrative storytelling, I see that there will always be linear narrative storytelling, just because you can craft that storytelling experience. But there's going to be a big move into interactive storytelling, and using things like artificial intelligence to adapt the story to the audience as they move around these virtual worlds.
The first kind of breakthrough product for VR will come from a major studio. I kind of believe it'll be Valve. I think it'll come from them first, or someone like them. It'll be some kind of breakthrough experience that isn't completely a game, it's not completely a movie, but it's this weird thing in the middle. You know, it's this passively interactive experience that will blow people away, and people will tell you, you know, you have to play that, you have to do this experience.
I present you with the award for Best Narrative Experience.
The Gallery, Episode 1, Cloudhead Games.
Your winner for Best Narrative Experience is The Gallery, Episode 1, Cloudhead Games.
You guys, this is where I want to start. Everyone in this room took a huge risk on VR, and that I appreciate more than anything, because everyone in this room spent time away from family dinners, from friends, to make this dream become a reality. And so I'm honored to be among you. So thank you, I appreciate it.